when I was a graduate student working in Keir Pearson's lab at the University of Alberta. At the time, when I was working with him, you'd always know that when you had a good idea, because Keir would immediately say, let's do that tomorrow. On the other hand, if you had an idea that was so-so, he would say, well, there's only so much time. And really, we will get to it, but, later. And that's when you knew it was a bad idea. So it was quite a binary process with Keir. But I'd just like to tell you of some of the fundamental knowledge that I gained in Keir's lab in terms of science and in terms of philosophy as well. So if we turn to the science first, what was dazzling in my mind was we found the ability to control how a cat walked. You could literally turn a knob on, and you could alter the cat's step cycle and how it would move on a treadmill. And you could do that even when the animal was devoid of descending input. We had ways of getting the animal to move. So that was absolutely fascinating. The next thing we found during that period of time was that the spinal cord itself could listen to cues from the periphery and reorganize its circuits to maximize the input upon injury. And again, this was absolutely fascinating. But I didn't go into the game with the idea that this would lead to anything. The only deliverable that Keir offered was a pint of Guinness, which he gave to me after some of our experiments. But really, what was interesting to me now, with the benefit of time, with the benefit of 20 years, almost 20 years later, I can look back at those papers and see who cited them. And what's interesting is that initially basic scientists, our colleagues, started to cite those papers, but of late, applied scientists are also citing those papers. So it's actually very, very nice to see that it is becoming translated. That was not our purpose, but it is actually starting to be translated, or at least used by applied scientists. And even NASA came to visit because they were interested in terms of weightlessness and long-term trips to space and the reorganization of the circuitry that might occur. But again, nothing was planned. But I want to wind back the clock even further when Keir arrived in Edmonton first. He started to work on cockroaches. And what he was interested in then, and which led to the research that I did in cats, and which eventually started to move on to applied scientists, was his interest in how cockroaches walked. And he found at the time very seminal findings that the load receptors of these insects could control how they walked. Roaches, the roach research he did at the time also was used in robotics. Because, of course, people like NASA, again, were interested in robots that could maneuver around rocks and whatnot, kind of better robots than the Pathfinder robot that you see in Mars. Now, it's difficult to envision Eli Lilly or the Royal Bank investing in roach research in Canada, isn't it? But, I think it comes back to a point. Basic science is not of interest for any individual enterprise, but it is important to society as a whole. And basic science is what we call a public good. Therefore, governments have a special responsibility to fund basic scientists, and that includes the Alberta government. And when I moved to Alberta in 1991, I was delighted to see how supportive Alberta was of basic science. I had no trouble imagining that Keir could be funded for studying cockroach walking in 1991, similar to when he arrived in the 60s. Today, I fear with the push for accountability, deliverables, and solutions, that his groundbreaking research in the 60s will be passed over. And that will be a shame because it influenced so much. So as we consider the restructuring of the funding model in Alberta, let us not lose sight of the importance of basic science. It is fragile, it requires nurturing, and is wholly dependent on government support. We have nothing else. And why should government support basic science? I think it's fitting to close with a quote by Michael Faraday when he was being badgered by William Gladstone, who was the finance minister at the time in 1860. And Gladstone was badgering him on what really was the practical use of electricity. And Faraday replied, "One day, sir, you may tax it." Thank you.